So today's lesson is going to be on Adam, God, and the Bible. This is going to be part three on a series on an introduction to the Adam-God Doctrine. So a lot of people, when it comes to Adam-God, focus just on, what was taught in early Mormonism. Was it taught in the Restoration or not? And obviously it was. There's overwhelming evidence it was. But what's just as important, in my opinion, is it compatible? Is it supported by other sources? Like, there is new revelation, but it's always great when new revelation harmonizes and fits with older revelation. And so this presentation is going to be digging into whether the Adam-God doctrine can be found in the Bible or not. So Brigham Young announced the Adam-God doctrine on April 9th, 1852. He said, "Now hear it, O inhabitants of the earth, Jew and Gentile, saint and sinner. When our father Adam came into the Garden of Eden, he came into it with a celestial body and brought Eve, one of his wives, with him. He helped to make and organize this world. He is Michael the archangel, the ancient of days, about whom holy men have written and spoken. He is our Father and our God, and the only God with whom we have to do. Every man upon the earth, professing Christians or non-professing, must hear it and will know it sooner or later." And in the same sermon, he says, after announcing that, he says, "Treasure up these things in your hearts. In the Bible, you've read the things I've told you tonight, but you have not known what you did read. I've told you no more than you are conversant with. But what do the people in Christendom with the Bible in their hands know about this subject? Comparatively nothing." And again, in a later Adam-God discourse 5 years later, he said, "It is all here in the Bible. I'm not telling you a word, but is contained in this book. Things were first created spiritually. The Father actually begat the spirits, and they were brought forth and lived with him. Then he commenced the work of creating earthly tabernacles, precisely as he had been created in the flesh himself, by partaking of the coarse materials that was organized and composed this earth until a system was charged with it. Consequently, the tabernacles of his children were organized from the coarse materials of this earth." So this is going to come back because we're going to get a little bit into the ancient um, religious context of the Hebrew Bible later on. And so Brigham Young emphasizes that our religious traditions that have been passed down to humanity come from the fact that God once dwelt on the earth and that God was the one who started civilization on this earth. He said, "How many nations were there in the days of Enoch? The very men who were associated with him had been with Adam. They knew him and his children, and they had a privilege of talking with God. Just think of it. Though we have in our history that our father Adam was made of the dust of this earth, and that he knew nothing about his God previous to him to being made here, yet it is not so. And when we learn the truth, we shall see and understand that he helped to make this world and was the chief manager in that operation. He was the person who brought the animals and the seeds and the other from other planets to this world, and brought a wife with him and stayed here. You may read and believe what you please as to what is found written in the Bible. Adam is made of the dust of an earth, but not from the dust of this earth. He was made as you were and I were made, and no person was ever made upon any other principle. Do you suppose that he, Father Adam, was acquainted with his associates who came here and helped to make this earth? Yes, they were just as familiar with each other as we are with our children and parents. Suppose a number of our sons were going to Carson Valley to build houses, open farms, and erect mills and workshops, and that we should say to them that we wish them to stay there 5 years, and then we will come and visit them. When I go there, will they be afraid of me? No, they would receive me as their father, just as Adam received his father." So a core aspect of the Adam-God doctrine was that Adam's father above him and God above him acted in his stead as God, while Adam was in mortality. So Brigham said this also. He said, "Can we tell how much better Mormonism is than the other religions and isms of the present day? More or less truth may be found in them all, both in civilized and barbarous nations. How has it transpired that theological truth is thus so widely disseminated? It is because God was once known on the earth among his children of mankind, as we know one another. Adam was as conversant with his father who placed him upon this earth as we are conversant with our earthly parents. The father frequently came to visit his son Adam and talked and walked with him, and the children of Adam were more or less acquainted with their grandfather. and their children were more or less acquainted with their great-grandfather, and the things that pertain to God and to heaven were as familiar among mankind in the first ages of their existence on the earth as these mountains are to our mountain boys, and our gardens are to our wives and children, or as the road to the western ocean is to the experienced travel. From this source, mankind have received their religious traditions. And so then there's also this very interesting statement by Joseph Smith about that can be understood as saying that each member of the Godhead has their own dispensation on earth. He said, an everlasting covenant was made between three personages before the organization of this earth and relates their dispensation of things to men on the earth. These personages, according to Abraham's record, are called God the first, the creator, God the second, the redeemer, and God the third, the witness or testator. So Jesus in the New Testament made an interesting comment indicating that the identity of God the Father was a secret. In Matthew 11:27, it records him as saying, all things are delivered unto me of my Father, and no man knoweth the Son but the Father, neither knoweth any man the Father save the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son will reveal him. And again, in John 17:3, he said the core aspect of the gospel, he said, this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. So Jesus made a very fascinating statement in that the most common title he referred to himself throughout the Gospels is the Son of Man. And this, I believe, is a key Adam-God statement. And probably the best place to prove this is where how it is utilized in Mark 2, verses 23 to 28. Jesus as the Son of Man or as the Son of Adam. So Mark 2, 23 to 28 is one of the most apparent places the Adam-God doctrine is hidden in plain sight in the New Testament. It states, and it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, and his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto him, behold, why do they on the Sabbath day do that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, have ye never read what David did when he had need and was hungered, and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the shewbread, which was not lawful to eat but for the priests, and gave also to them who were with him. And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is the Lord also of the Sabbath. This passage strongly indicates that when Jesus called himself the Son of Man, he was referring to himself being the son of Adam. And Jesus identified Adam as being the God who rested on the seventh day in Genesis 2, verses 2 through 3. And so what's interesting, somebody posted this in one of the discussions on Adam-God. If you take the term Adam's son, translate it to Hebrew, and then translate the Hebrew back to English, it translates as Son of Man. So man and Adam are the same word in Hebrew. So there is some scholarly support for Son of Man being understood as son of Adam in the New Testament. He said, so this was the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology in 1975 states, we find ourselves on an unusual path if we trace Mark 2:27 back to a Hebrew Ben Adam tradition. For then this text is understood as a reference to the creation story. The Sabbath was made for Adam and not Adam for the Sabbath. Hence the Son of Adam is Lord even over the Sabbath. And then Frederick Hoch Borscht in The Son of Man in Myth and History states, the Sabbath was made for man Adam and not man Adam for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of the man Adam is Lord also of the Sabbath. He is his legitimate heir. And so then another interesting scholar who argues this position is Joel Marcus, who is one of the authors of the recent Anchor Bible volume on the Gospel of Mark. In a 2003 paper stated that the term Son of Man in the New Testament is actually written in Greek, Son of the Man, with a definitive article implying the son of a specific man, and argued that that man is Adam. So his articles are fascinating, and these are kind of the summaries of his conclusions that were given at the beginning of each paper. He said, the gospel expression, the son of the man, means the son of Adam. The most natural way of construing the double definitive article is that it speaks of the son of a particular man, namely Adam, who's called, the Greek word in Genesis 1-2 in the Septuagint. The Adam in question, however, is not just the biblical protoplasm, but also the figure of later Jewish and Christian legend, who possessed dominion and divine glory, which will be restored to him in the Eshkelon, the ICF, the exalted Son of Man sayings, who exercised authority over the created order, which he governed as the earthly representative of the heavenly king, the present authority sayings, but who also is associated with the world's present condition of suffering and death, the suffering Son of Man sayings. And so, one second, let me. Okay, so let's see. Let me get my video going again. There we go. So then he also, in his part 2 of his paper, he said, a look at select passages in the Gospels confirms the thesis more generally in part 1 that Son of Man means Son of Adam, and that Jesus' self-designation coheres with and draws on biblical and early Jewish traditions about the first man. This does not, however, mean that Jesus as the Son of Man is merely human, since Adam is a figure of great glory, even godlikeness, in some of the traditions upon which the Son of Man sayings draw. Jesus, as Son of Man, therefore presents a glorified picture of human destiny, showing humanity eschatologically transformed to fulfill the destiny that God intended for it in the beginning. So, and then Brigham Young commented on this one time. He said, "Is it a mystery to the Christian world that Jesus is the Son of God and still the Son of Man? Yes, it is. It is hidden from them, and this fulfills the scripture. If our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost." 2 Corinthians 4:3. Who have no faith and who pay no attention to the Spirit of God. These things are called mysteries by the people because they know nothing about them, just like laying hands on the sick. So there's other places in the Gospels that also indicate the Adam-God doctrine. Another place is Matthew 19 verses 4-5 quotes Genesis 2:24, but Jesus says it was God who said it. So this is Matthew 19 4-5. He said, and he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. And so then that's referencing Genesis 2:23-24, but in Genesis 2, it's Adam's words. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And then in the Gospel of Luke 3:38 teaches the Adam-God doctrine. It's stating that Adam was the offspring of God. He said, which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of God. So an article in the Improvement Era in June 1900 comments on this verse. He says, in the 3rd chapter of Luke, we find the lineage of Jesus traced back to from Joseph to Adam. And in the 38th verse, it concludes as follows, which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of God. It's hardly to be supposed that this language is to be understood literally up to the last statement, and then it should be figurative. What object could there be in making this statement that Adam was the son of God if it were not the same line of fatherhood as all the rest? There is no break in the statement to indicate it should not be taken. There is no break in the statement to indicate that it should not be taken in the same literal sense as all the others. So another place where the Adam-God doctrine can be found in the Bible and the professed beliefs of Jesus is found in John chapter 8. Jesus' dialogue with the Pharisees demonstrate Adam-God was accompanied with another ancient belief, the doctrine that Cain was the offspring of the devil or the serpent in the Garden of Eden. This belief is commonly referred to as the dual seedline doctrine, as found in ancient Jewish sources and even suggested in some pre-biblical texts found in the Ugaritic. According to dual seedline, there were 2 primary lineages on this earth, Adam's and the devil's, and Cain was actually the offspring of the fornication by the devil. Some early Christians condemned this doctrine, while other early Christian texts acknowledged it to be true. Jesus' dialogue with the Pharisees tell that Jesus' opponents held to both Adam-God and dual seedline. For when Jesus told the Pharisees that ye do the works of your father, those Jews responded by saying, we weren't born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. That's John 8, verse 41. So the Pharisees interpreted Jesus saying that their father was the devil to mean that they were the offspring of the serpent. They responded by saying they weren't descended from fornication by the serpent that produced Cain, but that God was their father, which was equating Adam with God. So Jesus himself confirms that he held the same belief as they did regarding God's identity as Adam a few verses later in verse 54. If I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father that honoreth me, of whom ye say that he is your God. And that's John 8:54. So another place in the New Testament is, and this is probably my favorite place to present this doctrine in the New Testament because it's so apparently clear, is in the Gospel of Acts and the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts were written by the same author. And so the author not only indicated mankind were the literal offspring of God in Luke 3:38, but also in Acts 17, verses 28 through 29, when it recorded Paul teaching, for so for in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For inasmuch then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's devices. So it very explicitly says that mankind are the offspring of God. And the Greek word for that genus means kindred, offspring, family, stock, tribe, nation, nationality, or descent from a particular people, the aggregate of many individuals of the same nature, kind, or sort. So it means that we are the kindred, offspring, and family of God, and that we are the same species of God if we're the same nature, kind, and sort. And, I've never seen anyone have a really decent, who doesn't believe in mankind being the same species of God, have a good explanation for this verse. I hear, Paul was just, quoting the pagans. He wasn't actually agreeing with him, but it directly says he was agreeing with them. So the ancient Israelite religion, teaching that mankind was the literal offspring of God, was the exact same as, the pagans believing that mankind were the offspring of the gods. So Paul in Romans 1:21 has an interesting statement where he said, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. So he's referencing a time when humanity knew God on earth, but they didn't glorify him as God. And we'll see later that John, in the first epistle of John, has a very similar statement as well. So it's kind of interesting, referencing a time that God was living on earth. So the book of Hebrews states that Christ was in the brightness of his, God the Father's glory, and the express image of his person, Hebrews 1:3. Paul similarly referred to Adam in the epistle to the Romans as the figure of him, Christ, who was to come, Romans 5:14. In the epistle to the Ephesians, there's a curious statement about God the Father's relationship to mankind. For this cause I bow my knee unto the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom, or after whom, the whole family in heaven and earth is named. What did the author of Ephesians mean by this curious statement? One plausible interpretation can be found in the name the human family is given, man or mankind, which, as man and Adam are the same word in Hebrew, is to say Adamkind. So the human race is named after Adam, and this passage in Ephesians states that the whole family in heaven and earth is named after the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is to say man, mankind, or Adamkind, or as the King James Version translates the word in Genesis 5:2, Adam. So Genesis 5:1-2 states, this is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him, male and female, created he them, and blessed them and called their name Adam. in the day when they were created. So again, we're looking at Ephesians 3. For this cause I bow my knees unto the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named. The Genesis 5 states, male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day they were created. And so the footnote for that says, in Hebrew, Adam also is a common noun meaning man or mankind. So similar to how Paul in Romans references a time that God lived on earth and they didn't recognize him as being God. He said, behold, so this is 1 John chapter 3. Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore the world knoweth us not, because it knew him not. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. And then later on, he says, hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us. And then going on, he says, and this is his commandment, that we should believe on the name of his son, Jesus Christ. So some people try to take these instances of where it's talking about God laying down his life for us, or, the world didn't know God when he dwelt on earth, as referencing Jesus. But going on in that chapter, in the same context, that he's referencing Jesus, he's not referencing Jesus, because he's saying that God laid down his life for us and gave the commandment that we should believe on the name of Jesus Christ. And, there's actually very few places in the New Testament where Jesus is referred to as God. And there's never a place in the New Testament where he's referred to as the God. Only God the Father is considered the God in the New Testament. So now so we see that we have, a number of very interesting places that can be used to support the Adam-God doctrine in the New Testament. Now let's turn back to the Old Testament and go back to Genesis and look at how we should understand it, according to some of the suggestions that Brigham Young gave. He said, some think that he, Adam, was made like an adobe, and the Lord breathed into him the breath of life. For we read, from dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Well, he was made of the dust of the earth, but not of this earth. He was made just the same way you and I are made, but on another earth. He said, the first people of the earth were no more made of the dust than we are. I would not make out that Moses lied, by no means, but we are made of dust as much as Adam was, so are our cattle. They are formed or created from the elements of all which are necessary to produce animal or vegetable life. As the dust of the earth will produce grass, and the cattle will eat grass and increase. Every person must have a father and a mother, or they could not be. He also said, listen, ye Latter-day Saints, suppose that Adam was formed actually out of clay, out of the same kind of material from which bricks are formed, and that with this matter God made the pattern of a man and breathed into him the breath of life and left it there. In that state of supposed perfection, he would have been an adobe to this day. He would not have known anything. Some of you may doubt the truth of what I now say and argue that the Lord could teach him. This is a mistake. The Lord could not have taught him in any other way than the way in which he did teach him. You believe Adam was made out of the dust of this earth. This I do not believe, though it is supposed that it is written so in the Bible, but it is not to my understanding. You can write that information to the states if you please. I have publicly declared that I do not believe that portion of the Bible as the Christian world do. I never did, and I never want to. What is the reason I do not? Because I have come to understanding and banished from my mind all the baby stories my mother taught me when I was a child. And then he also said, now about the rib. As for the Lord taking a rib out of Adam's side to make a woman of, he took one out of my side just as much. But Brother Brigham, would you make it appear that Moses did not tell the truth? No, not a particle more than I would that your mother did not tell you the truth when she told you that little Billy came from a hollow toadstool. I would not accuse your mother of lying any more than I would Moses. The people in the days of Moses wanted to know things that was not for them, the same as your children do when they want to know where your little brother came from. And he answered them according to their folly, the same as you did your children. And he said, it is said by Moses, the historian, that the Lord caused a deep sleep to come upon Adam and took from his side a rib and formed the woman that Adam called Eve. This should be interpreted that the man Adam, like other man, had the seed within him to propagate his species, but not the woman. He conceives the seed, but she does not produce it. Consequently, she was taken from the side or bowels of her father. This explains the mystery of Moses's dark saying in regards to Adam and Eve. So dark saying is just an antiquated word meaning meaning riddle. He saw that it was a riddle of Moses's sayings regarding Adam and Eve. So in spite of that, that there are things in Genesis that should not be taken literally, but should be understood as riddles or figurative or metaphorical sayings. There are some clues to the Adam-God doctrine in Genesis. So Adam is portrayed as an intelligent being in authority over the earth before the fall, and in that he's the one that God directs to give names to every creature. And so out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all the cattle and to all the fowls of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not an helpmeet for him. That's Genesis 2:19-20. So before Adam had the sleep come upon him in the veil, losing his knowledge, he was an intelligent being who was, given authority over the earth. He wasn't a newborn baby at that time in his knowledge yet. He said Adam indicates that he had both a father and a mother, and had been born and had parents, rather than being merely created out of dust. We say that a man leaves his father and mother to cleave unto his wife in Genesis 2:23-24. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So that is a hidden right there in Genesis, that Adam had a father and mother, and so he was conceived and born like everyone else was, but on a prior earth, not on this earth. So Adam-God clues in Genesis continued. After Adam and Eve partook of the fruit, Adam realized his wife's status as the divine mother and said, and Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. That's Genesis 3:20. As Jehovah likely means creator, or he who brings into existence whatever exists, the Hebrew name of Eve, Havah, is a feminine form of Jehovah, meaning life giver. And so and also the title Mother of All Living also has Hebrew goddess connotations, as some scholars admit. And this is in the book Adam, Eve, and the Devil, A New Beginning. The name Havah is a noun of the quattle class designating a profession or function, meaning she who gives life. This is confirmed by the explanation that Adam called her like this because she is the mother of all the living. Several scholars have seen this title a reminiscence of either the concept of Mother Earth or the primeval mother goddess. The latter possibility becomes more likely now that in Ugaritic and elsewhere, Adamu appears to be paired with Kababa, the primordial mother goddess. Although it was obviously not the intent of the final redactor of Genesis to introduce Eve as a mother goddess, he may have wanted to redress these traditions by a deliberate hint in Genesis 3:20. So continuing, Genesis 4:1 is another interesting possible Adam-God verse that I recently became aware of. It states that Eve, after having a son, said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. The Hebrew word for gotten or produced or acquired in this phrase has a sexual connotation when you look at the historical context of that word, and it implies procreation, as some academic Bible scholars have acknowledged. And so so David E. Bakovoy wrote an entire article on this. It said, did Eve acquire, create, or procreate with Yahweh? A grammatical and contextual reassessment of the word in Genesis 4:1. And in that article, he states a grammatical reassessment of the Semitic root, as well as the contextual analysis of Eve's expression, supports a reading for Genesis 4:1b as I have procreated a man with Yahweh. And before he wrote that article, the scholar Dan McClellan stated on a Facebook discussion, I was explaining what the text says, not my personal theology. I don't believe Eve was conceived by Yahweh. The text, i.e. of Genesis 4:1, clearly states that, though. And that was in the Mormon Dialogue forums on the thread, Did Yahweh procreate Cain with Eve, in November of 2009. So Brigham had some Adam-God clues that he felt were contained in the story of Genesis. One example of one of these clues was he noted that there was no marriage ceremony between Adam and Eve, implying that Adam and Eve were already married and were already husband and wife when God presented Eve to Adam. He said, quote, "We have a history this morning of the great celebration of the first marriage that took place on this earth. I've been trying to find an account of the ceremony. I can find nothing more than the Lord presented the woman to the man, saying, 'This is bone of thy bone and flesh of thy flesh.' I cannot find any account of the ceremony. The Lord gave the woman to the man, and this is all the ceremony I can find. As to the great wedding Brother Orson Pratt has been telling us about, it is nothing more or less than this. Adam's father came to him saying, 'Here's the wife you've had for so long. Now you're going to have one wife to take with you to yonder earth. And if any of your other wives ever go to an earth to become the mother of all living, to become an Eve, it will be another earth, not to that one. She is called Eve because she's the mother of all living, and she's the queen of that earth. Adam is the Lord of the earth and the father of all living on this earth, as Eve is the mother of all living on this earth." So another clue he thought was hinted at Adam's prior familiarity with God before the Genesis story is that that he could tell the footsteps of God in the garden just by hearing his footsteps. He stated this in a sermon in April 1855. He said, "We can read the history of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and that after they transgressed, the Lord came along and they run scampering away into the bushes. How did they know it was him? Just as well as my family know mine, for they had lived with him and had a long experience with him. Just as soon as my family hear my footsteps, they know I am coming, and so did Adam and Eve know the footsteps of the Lord. Just as quick as they heard his footsteps, they knew who was coming and thought they had seen his face because they were acquainted with him. But this is no knowledge to you and I." Excuse me. One second. "He came along and said, 'Where are you? Where have you been doing?' They had hid themselves. It is evident from this that they knew his footsteps. But what advantage is that to you? Would you know the footsteps of the Lord if you heard them coming in this hall from merely reading this account? Well, how can we learn by reading in the history of Adam and Eve to know the Lord? If you were to hear the footsteps of the Lord, would you know from the history of Adam and Eve that it was the Lord coming? They knew the Lord and his footsteps, for they had lived with him and had been in eternity with him. And what I have upon the subject, I now say. Adam had been with the Lord and had lived with him on an earth like this, had been faithful and overcome, and had received his body and was resurrected and was well acquainted with the Lord and was one of his messmates. He had eaten and drunken with him and had lived with him from generation to generation, and in many worlds, probably while many had come into and gone out of existence." So there's other Adam-God allusions in the Pentateuch in the Old Testament. Genesis 4:1 isn't the only verse in the Old Testament that implies God had procreative power. Genesis 14, verses 19 and 22, the word translated as possessor of heaven and earth in the King James, or as creator of heaven and earth, had a sexual reproductive nuance, meaning procreator or begetter of heaven and earth. When you look at the context of that word as it was used in all the different ancient cultures around ancient Israel. So the root in Ugaritic illustrates the verb, in fact, often historically carries the nuance create. A dictionary of the Ugaritic language in the alphabetic tradition suggests that as a verbal form, it appears in the Ugaritic G stem carrying the meaning to acquire, to create or forge, and even specifically to procreate. In support of their interpretation, Del Olman Lette and San Martin list the Ugaritic expression which means procreator and divine lord of the gods, and progenerex of the gods, as examples of the specifically procreative nuance of this word. And then he goes and cites an example of it being used in a sexual reproductive context in a Ugaritic tablet. So that's in David Bokovoy's on Did Eve Acquire, Create, or Procreate with Yahweh paper. And then similarly, a dictionary of ancient Near Eastern mythology, states El, like the Mesopotamian An, represents divine authority and the creator of the world. He represents the principle of order on a cosmic and political level. His epitaphs reveal the range of his competence. He's the father of years. He's the father, the patriarch of all the gods, with the exception of Baal, who's consistently called the son of Dagon. As king, he rules over the world of men as well as gods. He's a source of royal power, and therefore the king on earth is called the son of El. He's Bull El, refers to his procreative power. That's an and his function of dispensing fertility. The sexual vigor of El has been the subject of much academic interest. And then David Bakavoy also stated, he says, as has been long noted, the traditional Canaanite conception of El as the procreator of earth provides a notable literary parallel to the biblical description of El Elyon in Genesis 14:19. In light of the widespread use of this imagery in the ancient Near East, it seems difficult to imagine that upon reading a statement linking Yahweh with the act of procreation in reference to the production of life, that an ancient audience would have failed to instinctively associate a semantic nuance that somehow reflects the basic concept of procreation. So, supporting this, the even a more conservative Bible commentary, the New English Translation, for comment on Proverbs 8:22 states, there are two roots. So that I wasn't saying the right word. The word was kana, I think was what I've been not being able to pronounce, but is what QNY means in Hebrew, and I was saying procreate. So there are two roots, kana, in Hebrew, one meaning to possess and the other meaning to create. The older translations did not know of the second root, but suspected it in certain places that a meaning like that was necessary, e.g. Genesis 4:1, 14:19, Deuteronomy 32:6. The Ugaritic confirmed that it was indeed another root. The older versions have the translation possess because otherwise it sounds like God lacked wisdom and therefore created it at the beginning. They wanted to avoid saying that wisdom was not eternal. Arius liked the idea of Christ as the wisdom of God and so chose the translation create. Athanasius translated it, constituted me the head of creation. The verb occurs 12 times in Proverbs with the meaning to acquire. But the Greek and the Syriac versions have the meaning create. Although the idea is that wisdom existed before creation, the parallel idea in these verses, point or given birth, argue the translation of create or establish. The third parallel verb, I was given birth, some translated it brought forth, not in the sense of being presented, but in being begotten, given birth to. Here's the strongest support of the translation of kana as created in Proverbs 8, verse 22. So, and then the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible states a cluster of names such as father, brother, kinsman were used in antiquity to express the very close family relationship between the deity and his worshippers. The concept of family kinship with the deity is reflected in the personal names like Eleb, my God is Father, in Numbers 1:9 and 1 Samuel 16:6. Isaiah, my divine brother is help, in Numbers 1, verse 12. Or Amishaddah, the God of my kindred is Shaddai, in Numbers 1:12. The ancient Semitic background of these divine names is the view that God was actually a blood relative of the clan or family whose members were by the same token sons, brothers, and kinsmen of the gods. And then the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament states a number of epitaphs reveal El as father and creator. He is called the Bull El, his father, King El, who created him, though Baal is called son of Dagon regularly in these texts. Here, El is called his father and progenitor. The epitaph Bull is noteworthy. One may compare, for example, the epitaph of the patriarchal god Bull of Jacob, i.e. in Genesis 49:24, which is mistranslated as the mighty one of Jacob. And so obviously the imagery of a bull is representing, strength and procreative power. El is creator, the ancient one, whose extraordinary procreative powers have populated heaven and earth. So one last place in the Old Testament that I find very significant in relation to the Adam-God doctrine is Adam, God, and Moses' song, which is Deuteronomy 32. So Moses' song is another significant place the Adam-God doctrine can be found in the Bible if one looks at the original text preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint. However, many significant statements were corrupted and obscured in the Masoretic text. So the King James Bible and other translations that are based on the Masoretic text are not accurate. One of the most significant parts of this chapter, accurately translated, reads, "Is this the way you repay Jehovah, you foolish and senseless people? Isn't he your father who created you? Has he not made you and established you? When the Most High divided the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Jehovah's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance." That's Deuteronomy 32, verses 6 through 9. This text was corrupted in the Masoretic text to instead teach that the 70 nations listed in Genesis 10 through 11 were set to the number of the descendants of Israel listed in Genesis 46, which doesn't make any sense. But Wikipedia summarized the scholarly consensus of the original doctrine as follows, quote, "It can be read to mean that Elion separated mankind into 70 nations according to his 70 sons, the 70 sons of El being mentioned in the Ugaritic text. Each of these sons to be the tutelary deity over one of the 70 nations, one of them being the God of Israel, Yahweh. Alternatively, it may mean that Elion, having given the other nations to his sons, now takes Israel for himself under the name of God. Both interpretations have supporters." And that's in the Wikipedia article for Elion. And so one thing, we've talked about the Ugaritic text a bit, and there's going to be a slide specifically going into the some of the aspects of what the Ugaritic tablets teach. But these were a bunch of tablets that date back to the time of Moses, when Moses was, is recorded. The Bible says he would have lived, about 1300 BC. And these tablets portray a very similar religion with tons of overlap and parallels to the ancient Israelite religion, this Canaanite religion in Syria, that dated to about the same time as Moses. So there's lots of fascinating things that scholars have derived from these tablets and other ancient archaeological findings that they say give context to the Hebrew Bible. So ultimately, not only did this verse teach that the different gods under the Most High were assigned for different nations, but also that the sons of Adam were directly equated to the sons of God, and that God himself had fathered Israel. So, like it said, when he equated the sons of Adam according to the number of the sons of God, and even the Septuagint maintained that translation as sons of Adam rather than translating it when he separated mankind, as some of the translations mistakenly obscure what is being said in that passage. So again, in Deuteronomy 32, verse 18, it says, "Of the rock who begot you, you are unmindful and have forgotten the God who fathered you," referencing the literal fatherhood of God again. And then continuing, besides Deuteronomy 32, 5 through 9 and 18 through 20, there's yet one other passage which affirms the doctrine of Israel being descended from God. However, as with the original reading of Deuteronomy 32, 8, Deuteronomy 32, 40, verse 43 was also obscured in the later Hebrew Masoretic text. The original rendering is not to be found in the King James Bible based on the Masoretic text, but it was preserved in the Septuagint and Dead Sea Scrolls. Part of this older rendering of this verse is even quoted in the New Testament, Hebrews 1:6. The English translation of the Septuagint reads as follows: "Rejoice, ye heavens, with him, and let all the angels of God worship him. Rejoice, ye Gentiles, with his people, and let all the sons of God strengthen themselves in him. For he will avenge the blood of his sons, and he will render vengeance and recompense justice to his enemies, and will reward them that hate him, and the Lord shall purge the land of his people." And that's in the Septuagint with the Apocrypha, the Brenton Septuagint translation of Deuteronomy 32, verse 43. So yet, like the original rendering of Deuteronomy 32, 8, significant parts of this verse are not to be found in the King James Version of the Bible. Sons is replaced with servants, and sons of God is changed to nations. The intent and reason for this corruption of the biblical text is obvious: to remove the understanding that God was the literal father of Israel. So lastly, one last very significant thing we learned from the Ugaritic is that El was, one of the titles for El was Ab Adam, or Father Adam. And this is noted in a bunch of different scholarship. For example, the book El in the Ugaritic Text, published in 1955, states, but El would hardly be called the father of a locality. In association with the prediction of El as king, Mik-Ab-Sm, one would not expect the name of any single one of his progeny, but something more comprehensive, such as father of mankind, Ab Adam in IK 37, or father of the gods. And so then the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament in 1974 states, a number of epitaphs reveal El as father and creator. A like epitaph is creator of creatures, and Ab Adam, father of man. In CTA 10, we find another El epitaph, meaning, indeed our creator is eternal, indeed ageless, he who formed us. Yet another formula used of El is thy patriarch. In later texts, we find the liturgical name, which means El, creator of the earth. However, contrary to the translations that translate Ab Adam as father of man, or father of mankind, some scholars would argue such Ugaritic titles might be viewed as proper names rather than descriptive of a relationship. Now, this is found in the Encyclopedia Judaica in 1971. A vague recollection of a Canaanite tradition has been surmised on the basis of one of the epithets of El, the head of the Ugaritic pantheon, namely Milk Absalom, which is commonly interpreted as the king father of years. Such a connection would be possible. It would not even then be certain if the correction of the rendering father of years for the Ugaritic Absim were certain. But in the first place, years is elsewhere in the Ugaritic, as in the Phoenician, not sm, but as sint. And as in the second place, father of, in the sense of possessing or characterized, is strictly an Arabic idiom. That is why H.L. Ginsberg formerly translated King Father Shunem, guessing that El was identified with the god Shunem, who is known from the Ugaritic ritual texts, which has its difficulties. So has another possible solution that Sim is the title of a double, or is a doublet of Sim men people. So the Absalom would have synonym with El's other epitaph, Ab Adam, father of mankind, or in other words, Father Adam. If you're going to take it, as we shouldn't describe it as a relationship, but we should take it as a proper title. So, fatherhood of God, obscured and restored. So there's a great book on the Ugaritic religion, and it's what it teaches about Adam and Eve, called Adam, Eve, and the Devil, A New Beginning. And it was published in, second revised edition was published in 2015. And it just has a lot of very fascinating references to this archaic understanding of Adam as being a deity, and this tradition of Adam and Eve, of the first sinner not being Adam and Eve, but actually the first sinner being an evil god who poisoned the earth, and the Adam was sent down to try to stop the corruption, but he loses his immortality in the process. But the Ugaritic narrative goes, but that he's promised that he will be able to have mortal posterity, even though he lost his immortality, that he would be immortal in a sense that he would have, continued posterity throughout the earth. So on the back cover, it summarizes this as follows: a number of clay tablets from the Ugaritic dating from the late 13th century BCE, throw new light, Corporal and Demore argue, on the background of the first chapters of Genesis and the myth of Adam. In these tablets, El, the creator deity, and his wife Asherah lived in a vineyard or garden on the slope of Mount Ararat. The The first sinner was not a human being, but an evil god called Horon who wanted to depose El. Horon was thrown from the mountain of the gods, and in revenge he transformed the tree of life in the garden into a tree of death and enveloped the whole world into a poisonous fog. Adam was sent down to restore life on earth, but failed because Horon, in the form of a huge serpent, bit him. As a result, Adam and his wife lost their immortality. So I might even just do a whole presentation in the future going into all the very fascinating stuff that's in this book. But an excerpt is, of all the creatures, humans were closest to the gods. After all, they descended from a god. It is interesting that one tablet attributes considerable power to Adamu. The champion was exalted. They gave the earth in his hand. And that's on pages 26 through 27 of the book. And so then on page 116, it states, we want to state right away that we find ourselves in agreement with the current view that Genesis 1 through 11, and especially Genesis 1 through 4, are late monotheistic reworkings of certain earlier, more mythological accounts of the creation of human beings and the primordial history. And one big difference they note between the Ugaritic text and the Hebrew Bible is that the Ugaritic text emphasize El's title of being God the Father, while it is not a title that is ever really, explicitly found in the Old Testament. There are a few places. It's a much rarer title of God being called Father. And it's especially absent from the beginning of Genesis in the Adam and Eve story, which they note on page 117. So it can be plainly observed that in the New Testament, however, Jesus Christ strongly emphasized God being our Father. So, he really emphasizes the title of God the Father. So Jesus restored the lost title and understanding of God being our mankind's literal Father from a religion that was over 1,000 years prior. And similarly, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, nearly 2,000 years after Christ's mortal ministry, restored the same doctrine of mankind being the literal offspring of God, which is hidden in the Bible but has been obscured, and people didn't realize the Bible taught what it teaches. And so I'm grateful for the restoration of this knowledge, and I'm grateful for what has been preserved and passed down that validates this doctrine. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.